So you always see people talking online about how backgrounds can be really difficult to paint, or how they don't know where to get started with them. I had this problem myself earlier in my art journey, and maybe you do too. Maybe you draw people or animals, but always leave a plain coloured background or pattern behind them and want to do something more. It can be hard to get motivated to finish art of an environment because a lot of the time it doesn't start to look good until you're getting near the end of it. You might find it hard to push through the ugly stage, but the best way to improve is by pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. So here's my 5 tips for making that easier. Starting off with maybe one of the most important tips, make sure to use photographs as references. Things like rocks and water sound simple, but when you look closely, they can be even more complex than you'd think. If you want some realism in your art, looking closely at these will be very useful. Even if you're painting a completely made-up fantasy scene, having convincing-looking water, for example, can add a lot to the believability. Fear of the blank white page can be a very real thing too, so having a solid idea of what you want to achieve will make things feel less intimidating. With photos, you can see how light and colour work together and how objects are scaled against each other. No one remembers exactly how everything looks in their mind, so it will help you to remember little details like how scenery looks as it fades into the distant horizon, or how grass can be made up of lots of different plants. References will help spark new ideas for you too. There might be extra little storytelling elements, or props you wouldn't have thought of otherwise, which add a real human touch to your background. Pinterest is really nice to browse for this sort of inspiration, and is great for getting inspired to try out a new colour scheme. Overall, your final artwork will most likely look better if you used references than if you didn't. Tip number 2 involves drawing natural environments rather than man-made ones. By no means should you completely avoid learning about perspective, it's very useful to know. But if you're just looking to gain experience and confidence in completing a background, this can be a much easier way to start out. Forests or mountains or caves are really good things to start off with. Things like city scenes can involve multiple perspective points, which can add a whole extra time-consuming layer to things. If you're worrying about working around a perspective grid, it can make your scene look very stiff and static. Just always keep in mind where your horizon line will be, which is at the eye line of where you're viewing it from. A high horizon makes things look very small, as if you're above everything, while a low line makes it look like you're viewing the scene from close to the ground. Things will get smaller the further away they get, and the great thing about plants and trees is that they have so much variation, so you don't have to be super precise when lining them up to a grid. They're very forgiving to draw. The third tip is to avoid the default hard round brush. Nature is very random and imperfect, so going in and doing every little texture and crack by hand will take you forever. There's loads of cool free brushes online you can try with nice textures, or you can challenge yourself to only use the inbuilt ones that come with the program you use. If you're using multiply layers, you can quickly make a more interesting and complex looking shadow. You can also add the most detail to your focal point and use textured brushes to hint at it for the rest of the piece. Trying out different brushes is also a good way to find one you really enjoy, which can go a good way to helping you develop your own art style. These have different names depending on what program you're using, but a reference window or navigator window are one of my favourite tools to use. This lets you always see the whole image at once, so you can always be aware of how the values and colours are working together. It's useful for every stage of the piece, from the sketch to the last bit of rendering. It also helps you to stop from focusing on really tiny details which have a minimal impact on the final piece. If you find yourself working on something that isn't coming up visibly in the navigator, ask yourself if it's definitely necessary. If it's important to you, it will also let you have an idea of how people will first see it on social media, as a lot of digital art is probably mostly viewed nowadays on little phone screens while people are scrolling through their feeds. This helps you create a more impactful and eye-catching piece, and you won't have to zoom in and out as much on your piece, which is a time saver too. Here's the last tip for this video, and it's to limit your colours and your lighting sources. A single point of light makes it easier to place your reflections and shadows. It also means it's simpler to get your values right and helps you to avoid muddy colours by not having to work out how they'll interact with different colours of light. It makes it all less technical by reducing the amount you have to think about, so you can focus more clearly on just painting. Related to this, you can also limit your colour palette. Maybe you just want to work with shades of blue, or maybe you want to try out a complementary colour scheme, or maybe you want to pick a certain colour to completely avoid. As an example of this, in this piece, I wanted to work mostly with green with a warm yellow light source coming from the sky on the left, so the areas in light take on a yellow tinge. In this piece, with a slightly different style, I knew I wanted to work with blues and pinks, so there's no yellows or oranges in it. And with that, I hope you find this video helpful. If you'd like any more advanced tips that delve a bit deeper, let me know and I can share some more. But in the meantime, I hope you feel inspired to dig out that abandoned piece you've had sitting around and give it another go.